Good morning, and welcome to the kickoff of the study tour. The next 3 days will explore the prospects of a Family Justice Center for Delaware. I want to welcome Ken Shetter, Michelle Morgan, and Sarah Pike from the Alliance for Hope International, and specifically the Family Justice Alliance. Ken and Michelle will be facilitating our meetings over the next few days. The idea of a Family Justice Center was studied before, and now Governor Carney, then Lieutenant Governor Carney, led the study team, which ended up recommending the establishment of a Family Justice Center in Newcastle County. The report was issued in 2005. For various reasons, Delaware did not move forward with the Family Justice Center at that time. Now, 17 years later, Family Justice Centers have continued to open around the country, with 10 new centers opened during the pandemic. And those new centers join approximately 150 centers in 44 states and 25 countries. The Family Justice Center concept is the quintessence of collaboration. We collaborate well in Delaware, but I think we can all agree that we can always improve and do better, especially for the survivors of domestic violence. The establishment of a Family Justice Center for Delaware has been discussed in many settings recently. In June 2021, the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, the Family Court, and the Administrative Office of the Courts held a conference on strangulation, and at that time we heard from Casey Gwynn and Gail Strack from the Alliance for Hope International as they led us through that day. That evening I was in touch with both Casey and Gail, and they encouraged us to consider the establishment of a Family Justice Center here in Delaware. The Domestic Violence Coordinating Council heard more about the Family Justice Center from Casey at our meeting in the fall of 2021. So today we start the examination process again. I encourage you to question, keep an open mind, and challenge us and each other to get to the right result for Delaware. I want you to understand what a Family Justice Center is not. You may be aware that there are conversations taking place about a social justice center for Delaware and whether that creation of a social justice center is appropriate for Delaware. The social justice center being contemplated is focused on assisting with the social and legal needs of marginalized people who are low income, people with disabilities, and the elderly. The Family Justice Center is contemplated statewide, while the Social Justice Center is focusing on Newcastle County and Wilmington specifically. Because both centers contemplate serving different, overlapping population and needs, they can both exist simultaneously, and the result will be more Delawareans receiving needed services. So I want to again welcome you, thank you for participating over these next 3 days. And it's my pleasure now to introduce Maureen Monagle, Mo Monagle, the Executive Director of the Domestic Violence Coordinating Council, and Laura Graham from Community Legal Aid Society, and the Chair of our Family Justice Center Steering Committee.
Good to go. Good morning, everyone. Thanks again for joining us this morning. We realize the shift to the virtual program for many of you has created a little bit of a challenge. We really appreciate your cooperation and your being able to join us. So Laura and I are going to go over a couple different things before we kick it off to Ken and Michelle. In this morning's forum, we hope to provide you with an overview of domestic violence services in Delaware. You'll hear about an overview of the Family Justice Center model, and then we're asking members of the community and our partners we're seeking your input on how to open or implement a Family Justice Center model in Delaware. To give everyone a little bit of background, in case you're not familiar, The Domestic Violence Coordinating Council was created in 1993. It's a state agency legislatively created to improve Delaware's response to domestic violence and sexual assault. The DVCC's mission is they are committed to lead the nation through innovative legislative action, community education, and an outstanding coordinated system response to violence in families and the community. Our statutory duties and responsibilities are defined in our statute, and we wanted to highlight a couple of them to explain why the DVCC has taken on this initiative. Part of our statute, our duties, we continuously study court services and procedures, law enforcement procedures and protocol, and criminal justice data collection and analysis as it relates to domestic violence. The Council also effectuates coordination between agencies, departments, and the courts with victims of domestic violence and abuse. And then finally, the ultimate goal with the Council is to improve the response to domestic violence and abuse so as to reduce the incidence thereof. Judge Knoll gave a little bit of a background about how we came to today, but just wanted to highlight so you have a little bit more information. When COVID hit, the Council really started to analyze some data as it impacts victims and survivors. Judge Knoll explained that in June 2021, Family Court, the Administrative Office of the Court, and the DVCC held a training on strangulation provided by the Alliance for Hope International to more than 250 individuals. In September of 2020, the Council invited Casey Gwynn, the president and co-founder of the Alliance for Hope International, to the quarterly meeting of the DVCC. And after that presentation from Casey Gwynn, the Council decided to implement a Family Justice Center steering committee to further look at what Delaware could do to implement the model. The steering committee first met in November of 2021, and we've been meeting monthly or every other month since. And then we received some funding to support a contract. So on March 2nd, 2022, we contracted with the Family Justice Center Alliance for their consulting, technical assistance, and training services. Right now we're in phase 1, and that includes today and the next couple days. Ken, Michelle, and Sarah from the Family Justice Center Alliance are here in Delaware to help us with a study tour. Our event today just includes our community forum that you're all participating on now. And then later on today, we've invited many members of the community based on your work, your profession, or the geography of your agency. You'll be invited to participate in breakout groups. These groups are important for us to hear from you. If for any reason, because of technology and the shift to the Zoom world, you do not have that link, you can email me directly, and when I'm finished, I'll get you those links. The study in the next few days also includes survivor focus groups, and they'll also be doing court observation, and then we will also be doing some visits with their providers and shelter tours with People's Place and Child Inc., and then also visiting the Children's Advocacy Center. And then that sets us up for the next few months of work with the FCJ, with National Family Justice Center Alliance, to do more work on strategic planning. Now we want to switch to provide you a little bit of data, just to give you an idea of domestic violence in the state of Delaware. Looking at the DVCC's annual reports over the past couple of years, you will see the slight decrease in the past couple years of the criminal and non-criminal reports to law enforcement. We had a slight decrease in 2020 and 2021. Now, these statistics are based on the state fiscal year, so this is July through June. And non-criminal incidents, for those of you that don't know, that might include verbal altercations that might not rise to the level of a crime. It may include law enforcement providing services with PFA orders or custody exchanges. So there's many avenues where our law enforcement, members of our law enforcement community, provide assistance to survivors. Of those numbers that you just looked at, this is the breakout of our criminal DV incidents in the fiscal years. Again, we had a slight drop in FY20 and 21. We're connecting this link possibly to COVID, although it's unclear. This is the same information, just to show you on a different slide, where we fall within the splits between criminal and non-criminal incidents. So we average around 50% between the two. The other information that we looked at is our domestic violence hotline calls. These are Delaware has two agencies that run their hotlines, Child Inc. and People's Place, as well as there's the national hotline, which connects to both services. As you can see, in fiscal year 2020, we had an increase of calls to our hotline. This, again, may have been related to the COVID and the need for services. And we've had a little bit of a drop since things have started lifting up in 2021. Our other figure that we really want to show you is the shelter statistics. Again, Child Inc. and People's Place operates the 5 domestic violence shelters in the state. Child Inc. has 2 in Newcastle County, and People's Place has 3 in Kent and Sussex, and this includes the Abrienda Cortez program. As you can see, the need for shelter increased significantly over the past couple of years. And we wanted to further break down what you could see. Child Inc.'s shelters provided, again, increased significantly this past year. And during COVID, it should be noted that Child Inc. and People's Place work with our partners. They, when someone was in need of shelter, they were able to provide safe shelter in motels with additional funding that they received. And this is People's Place breakdown for the 3 shelters that they operate over the past few years. Now I'm going to turn it over to Laura Graham, who's going to walk you through the next slides.
Thank you, Mo. So Mo talked through the data showing the increase in shelter calls and also in hotline calls. You also looked over data related to police contact by survivors of domestic violence and family violence. But what services are available to these survivors? Where does the survivor need to go, and where does he or she need to reach out? What are the touch points in the system with whom they have to share their story in order to seek assistance and safety? All right, Mo, do you want to go ahead and advance for me? So we just want to walk you through a day, a week, perhaps a month in the life of a survivor here in Delaware when he or she is seeking services. They may reach out to a friend or a family member to explain what is happening to them in their relationship or their home. Then, they may reach out to a domestic violence hotline. That can include one of our state hotlines, again, that Mo mentioned are run by Child Inc. or People's Place. They may also reach out to the national hotline, and they're telling their story and explaining their needs and their safety issues to the hotline operators. Next, they may do a DV shelter intake. So the intake and the information required for them to seek shelter and enter the shelter system, perhaps with their children and or their pets. So they're explaining their DV situation again to the shelter hotline for intake. If the survivor is interested in learning about a protection from abuse order or a civil protective order, they can reach out to the Domestic Violence Advocacy Program, which Child Inc. operates in the 3 courthouses in our state. When you reach out to DVAP for assistance, they can provide court accompaniment, filling out of a PFA petition for filing with the court, as well as general information. So again, is the survivor telling their story and receiving services from DVAP for potential PFA intake. Next, they might speak with a domestic violence community advocate, which is operated in several community-based service providers within our state. That could be at Child Inc., that could be at People's Place, the Delaware Center for Justice, or one of our culturally specific providers at Abriendo Puertas or La Esperanza or LACC here in Wilmington. Then, if the survivor would like to seek representation on his or her protection from abuse order, they would reach out to one of the civil legal services providers for the possibility of representation at their PFA hearing. That can include Community Legal Aid Society, the Delaware Volunteer Legal Services, or DVLS, or the civil clinic, the Family Law Clinic at the Delaware Law School. Next, the survivor may seek services through Capitol Police, which runs a domestic violence program in the 3 courthouses. The Capitol Police provides safe escort for survivors to and from their hearing, as well as any other ancillary hearings that the survivor may have at one of the 3 courthouses in our state. So again, another touch point for a survivor to reach out to and seek services. Next, a survivor may speak with a counselor or a community advocate for mental health services, for counseling, for safety planning, in addition to the planning they received at the hotline, or for a whole host of services. And there are many community-based partners that provide these services. Are you getting overwhelmed yet with all the dots on your screen? Next, a survivor, if they decide to pursue law enforcement assistance, they can reach out in an emergency situation to 911. And so they'll be telling their domestic violence situation to the 911 operator with the hopes of getting support and services from law enforcement. They will be telling their domestic violence story, including the most recent incident that led to them contacting 911, to the responding law enforcement officer. So again, another touch point for a survivor to tell his or her story. Next, the survivor, if they have any injuries, might be reporting those injuries to a sexual assault nurse examiner or a forensic nurse. They may be seeking services at their primary care provider, or they may report to the emergency department at a local hospital where they're getting services related to their domestic violence injuries. If they're working with a law enforcement office that investigated their 911 call or their incident report, that police department may have victim-based services, police-based victim services in their unit. So the larger police departments have in-house victim-based service providers, but then the Delaware State Police runs the Victim Center that the survivor could get services from those police-based victim services. So again, another touch point for the survivor to get assistance. They may be working with family court if they haven't filed a protective order already. Law enforcement may be referring them to family court or the domestic violence advocacy program we talked about a little bit earlier to fill out the paperwork to seek a protection from abuse order. So they would be going to family court intake for that. Then, if they proceed to a hearing, including an emergency or an ex parte hearing, they would be appearing in family court in front of a family court commissioner, and again, telling their story with the hopes of getting a protection from abuse order. Then, the family court will schedule them with a mediator to try and mediate or seek a consent order on the protection from abuse petition. So again, the petitioner will be appearing with a mediator at family court to deal with their protection from abuse petition. If mediation is not successful, the parties will proceed to appear in front of a family court commissioner who will hear a trial or a hearing on the domestic violence where the survivor is hoping to seek a protection from abuse order. So again, another point where the survivor is appearing in court and telling his or her story to the commissioner. Then, if you get a protection from abuse order that requires the respondent to stay away from the Child in Commons daycare or school, the survivor is going to have to provide that protective order to the child's daycare or educational provider. So again, another touch point for the survivor to explain the domestic violence. There may also be child welfare system involvement, so DFS, or the Division of Family Services, may be involved if the child witnessed or was also a victim of domestic violence. So there is a DFS investigation or discussion happening as well for the survivor. There's more. Next, the survivor and or their children may be interviewed at the Child Advocacy Center, which is a center that provides law enforcement, social work, DFS, and medical team-based interviews of children in an appropriate setting for the things that a child may be a victim of. So there may be a Child Advocacy Center or a CAC intake that takes place. If the survivor contacted 911 and the respondent, or now the defendant, was arrested, there is criminal justice proceedings taking place parallel to the protection from abuse, the civil proceedings. So the survivor may have contact with the prosecutor who is prosecuting the domestic violence crimes committed against them. That may also involve meeting with a domestic violence, a DOJ, a Department of Justice victim witness social worker to provide services and coordinate victim witness testimony or appearance in court. If the survivor receives public benefits, they will need to report that the abuser, the respondent, the defendant, is no longer in the home and their income is no longer in the home. So they'll need to effectuate changes for their children in common, for their food stamps, for their Medicaid. If the survivor left the relationship and no longer has the abuser's income, he or she may need to apply for public benefits for the first time to support themselves or their family. So it's a touch point with the Division of Social Services seeking these public benefits. If the survivor has any crime-related financial injuries or needs support financially related to their victimization, they can apply for victims' compensation from VCAP, operated in the state of Delaware. So that's another place that the survivor would be submitting an application and explaining their domestic violence situation and financial needs related to that situation. A survivor often has to tell his or her employer why they're missing work for all of the hearings or the appointments in these dots and squares and triangles you see on this screen. So there's some coordination that happens with the survivor's employer as well. And then if the survivor is or someone with a disability, there may be involvement of the Division of Services for Aging and Adults with Physical Disabilities. So that's another social worker and department that the survivor would be reaching out to and receiving services from. Now, at this point, you should feel this slide is incredibly overwhelming, and it is. That's the whole point of this, to visually have you experience what a survivor goes through. I want to add one more layer on top of that. If a survivor does not speak English, whether it's a foreign language or they are deaf and required to sign using ASL, that's an added layer of something, a barrier that a survivor is going to have to overcome to deal with all these many different organizations where they would receive services. So it's one more thing for a survivor to have to overcome in order to get help and leave an abusive situation if that's what they decide they want to do.
That's everything.
So, I'm sure there are multiple spots that we have not listed that an individual survivor may need to seek services from, but this gives you kind of a good feeling, a bit of a claustrophobic feeling of how much a survivor needs to do in order to receive services. And that's not to say that these agencies don't coordinate and work hard and work together, particularly in a state like Delaware, but it's still a lot for a survivor to have to deal with in order to receive services and hopefully move to safety. So with that overwhelming slide in mind, that's why we are here today to talk about, is a Family Justice Center right for Delaware? And if so, what does that look like for us in each of our 3 counties and in our state? So we're going to introduce Ken Shetter and Michelle Morgan from the National Family Justice Center Alliance to talk with us about what a Family Justice Center might look like in Delaware. Just to give you some brief background on Ken and Michelle, Ken is the National Director of the Family Justice Center Alliance. And in addition to his role as mayor in Burleson, Texas, Ken became the first executive director of the Safe City Commission in Tarrant County, which collaborated with dozens of other agencies to build and operate One Safe Place, which is in Fort Worth, and it's the largest family justice center in Texas. Michelle began her career as a law enforcement victim advocate with the Fort Worth Police Department. Under the leadership of Fort Worth Police Department and the Safe City Commission, Michelle led the planning and development effort of One Safe Place, the Tarrant Regional Family Justice Center, creating one of the largest and most comprehensive family justice centers in the world. She is currently the Vice President and Director of the Family Justice Center for One Safe Place in Fort Worth, Texas. So we are pleased to have Ken and Michelle and their breadth of experience running family justice centers here with us today in Delaware.
Good morning, everybody. We are really excited to join you here in Delaware, and Michelle and I just want to express our appreciation to Mo and Laura and everyone who's part of the DVCC for all of the great work that you have done in preparing for this moment today and preparing for the development of a Family Justice Center. And Michelle and I, having been through this work, can tell you it's an amazing journey. And there is, you're in for, like I said, an amazing journey, and the benefit to survivors in your state is just can't be overstated. So thank you for taking on this work. We are big believers in it, and we are honored and excited to get to be just a little bit of a part of your journey. So, and just to rehash a little bit, reintroduce myself, make it simple. So I play 2 roles. And again, my name is Ken Shetter, and in addition to serving as the National Director of the Family Justice Center Alliance, which I have been doing since November of last year, I am also the President of One Safe Place in Fort Worth, where we are a comprehensive crime prevention agency, but as you heard, also operate a Family Justice Center. And in fact, we just celebrated the 10th anniversary of the opening of our Family Justice Center, and are really proud of that work. And by the time Michelle and I leave, y'all are probably going to get sick of hearing about Fort Worth and One Safe Place. But we love to tell that story. And actually, I think there is a lot about our experience that can inform the work that you are doing here in Delaware. Also here with us on this trip is Sarah Pike, who is a program manager with the Family Justice Center Alliance. She is handling a lot of the logistics of our study tour, and hopefully as we progress into strategic planning, we'll be a key player in that work as well. So I know a lot of you will get to meet Sarah over the coming days. And of course, Michelle Morgan, who is Vice President and Executive Director of the Family Justice Center at One Safe Place in Fort Worth, and is also a veteran of doing.
Veteran.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how I feel about that. Are you trying to say I'm old now?
No.
Oh, okay.
But she has done this study tour and strategic planning work before, and so brings a really great experience to this work. So, and just want to give you a sense of, this is our team at the Alliance for Hope that's doing lots of great work to help build, not only build strong family justice centers across America, but is also doing some other things that we'll talk about a little bit later to improve the kinds of services we provide for survivors of domestic violence and other trauma, not only in family justice centers, but more broadly across this country. And just we always want to give you a little bit of a look at our National Advisory Board as part of our governance structure. And just a little bit about what we're going to do today. So we'll talk a little bit more about who we are at the Alliance for Hope International and what we do. We'll talk about the Family Justice Center framework. And not only are we going to talk about the benefits of integration and co-location of services for survivors, but we'll talk about the challenges of building those frameworks as well. We'll give you a tour of national and international family justice centers, and then we'll talk a little bit more about how the Alliance helps communities dream big, which is what we're doing here. So I just want to give you a brief introduction into hope. As Mother Teresa said, we want to create hope for every person. We must give hope, always hope. And so the work of the Alliance for Hope and the work of family justice centers around this country is now based in the science of hope. And because we know now something we didn't know maybe a generation ago, which is that the key to overcoming trauma, the most significant indicator of well-being and resilience, is hopefulness. So we have sort of recreated Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and so we like to think about as we encounter our survivors and we begin to address the most basic needs from food, shelter, to safety and basic sense of safety and security. Ultimately, what we are aiming for is the realization of hopefulness, which is the belief that your future can be better than your past and that you're going to play a role in it, which means that we want to be hope givers in this work. And by that, my definition of being a hope giver is that I believe that the people we serve, I believe that their futures are going to be better than their past, and that we are going to get to play a role in it. And we know that trauma, both direct and vicarious trauma and adversity in life, rob us of hope. And certainly the survivors that we serve are systematically robbed of hope. And we know that the children who live in homes where there is domestic violence are the first ones who are robbed of their hopefulness. And so we'll talk about today that as we build these family justice center and co-location frameworks, not only must we focus on serving adult survivors of domestic violence, but we must also be focused on serving children through family justice centers, because we know that childhood trauma is the single greatest threat to public health, and it's the single greatest threat to community safety on the planet. So just a word about the Alliance for Hope, so you get a sense of the work we do. Think of these as the various programs of the Alliance for Hope International. So Michelle and I and Sarah are here today as part of the work of the National Family Justice Center Alliance, and our job through the NFJCA is to help communities like yours develop new family justice centers, to support existing family justice centers across the country with technical assistance. Then we have Camp Hope America, whose role is to help with the development of new Camp Hopes across the country, and also to support existing Camp Hopes. And I want to mention that while many of our Camp Hope programs across the country are connected with family justice centers, we also are starting Camp Hope programs across the country in areas that don't yet have a family justice center. And of course, the way we look at it, if there is a family justice center, there's an opportunity to build Camp Hope. And if there's a Camp Hope where there is not yet a Family Justice Center, that creates great synergy for the development of a Family Justice Center as well. Our Voices program, we have a national chapter of Voices, which is an organization of our survivors. And I think that's one of the things that is that we are most proud of about the Family Justice Center work, and I think that is a hallmark of the Family Justice Centers, is that our work is driven by survivors. We believe survivors should be part of the governance of Family Justice Centers. Survivors should be key to informing the development and the operation of Family Justice Centers. So not only do we have our national Voices Committee, but there are Voices Committees that are attached to Family Justice Centers all across the country and internationally as well. And then, of course, you all here, many of you are familiar with the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, because as the judge mentioned and as Mo mentioned, in some ways we are here today as a result of Gail and Casey having been here a year or so ago and doing a program on strangulation prevention. So the goal of the Institute is to really transform how we serve survivors who have been strangled, because we know it is really critical to this work, and we'll get into more detail about that in just a little bit. And then I guess the newest initiative of the Alliance is the Justice Legal Network, that is focused on cases around the country where justice has not been served. We know that particularly where strangulation is involved, there are many cases that have been ruled a suicide, that upon closer look we know that there really was much more than a suicide that took place. And so we know that in order to address domestic violence effectively, perpetrators must be held accountable. And we know that survivors are more likely to survive when their abusers are held accountable. So the Justice Legal Network is focused on ensuring that justice is done for survivors across the country. So let's talk a little bit about the need for family justice centers. And I've talked long enough without you hearing from Michelle, so I'm going to invite Michelle to speak to this. But I do want to mention, just a trigger warning, the next slide does have a graphic photo.
I appreciate that, because
Yeah.
it actually is a very graphic
Yeah.
photo. So why the need? Domestic violence, child abuse, sexual assault, elder abuse, and human trafficking. I think that Laura's picture that she started with in Delaware was a prime example specific to Delaware of why you need, like, I got dizzy with all the different shapes that were on that slide that continue to just go and go and go and go. But I'm going to tell you what is not, it's not unique to just Delaware. I mean, in our county, when we were building our Family Justice Center, we began to do a community needs assessment to see how many different locations does a survivor have to go to get all of their services. And we identified 30 different locations that someone potentially would have to go to get all of their services. So that's why the need. We need to have ease of access to services. We need to break down some of those barriers. We need to increase accountability to service providers, and really looking at reducing those homicides. Ken and I definitely, the Alliance as a national organization as a whole, believe that domestic violence homicides are 100% preventable. They're preventable. We know what those high risk factors are, and so we need to do something to coordinate more efforts. We've got a lot of great services in Delaware across the country, but are they really coordinated? Are they working together? And so it's a complicated issue when we're trying to address domestic violence, interpersonal violence, child abuse, sexual assault, elder abuse, and human trafficking.
And let's just mentioned too, this idea of bringing all the services together under one roof in one place. It's not just a matter of convenience for a survivor of domestic violence, because we know that domestic violence is fundamentally about power and control. And I know I'm speaking to the choir, and all of you know this, but I think it just has to be said that when we force a survivor to go to multiple places, sometimes 5, 10, or more places, we're not just making a system that's inconvenient for them. We are forcing them to risk their lives in order to get help. Because our experience is, and I'm sure yours is too, that for many survivors, one of the ways that power and control manifests itself is control over your very mobility. So we have many clients that walk through our doors on a regular basis who aren't allowed to have their own vehicle. And if they do have their own vehicle, where they go and when they go there is tightly controlled, so that the ability to go multiple places, when we know that when a survivor decides to go get help, to try to gain independence, to try to gain safety, that is a great moment of peril for them, that they are retaking control for themselves. And so that we know that that's a time that an abuser is likely to exert greater control, to escalate the violence in order to take control of the situation back. So getting all these services in one place, integrating those services, it's not just about convenience. It's about providing services in a manner that is more safe for the survivor.
So I've been an advocate for 22 years. So the next slide that we want to show you is not to offend anyone. This is the framework that I started in back 22 years ago. I thought, yes, this is the answer to everything. You have a brochure. And everyone's numbers is on that brochure. Like, hey, all those 30 different locations, all of those shapes that Laura showed us, all of their information is on a brochure. And here you are, survivor that is experiencing trauma and has what we call trauma brain. Figure out which one to call and navigate this very complicated system, right? Like, as an advocate, when I started to call some of these numbers on behalf of some of our survivors, like, I was getting the door slammed in my face and I had to go through A, B, and C. And at this agency, I had to go through X, Y, and Z. And how many different pieces of paper I had to fill out at all those different agencies. The day and age of giving a survivor a brochure and having them navigate that is so ancient. And so we've got to move beyond this added brochure of here's all of your different agencies and good luck to you, and think that that is effective advocacy. So the Family Justice Center framework is so much more.
Let's tell this story real quick. In Fort Worth, our version of the brochure was a purple sheet, right?
Yes.
And when we started our strategic planning, there was a lieutenant, I think at the time, of the police department named Linda Stewart, who was leading the law enforcement side of things through our strategic planning. She had a daughter that was a rookie officer, and she came in one day and told us a story that her daughter had responded to a domestic violence call and ended up being the daughter of a victim that she had responded to about 30 years before. And she said the thing that frustrated me the most was not just that we had 2 generations that were repeating this cycle, but that her daughter, the best resource she had to give to that family was the same stinking purple sheet
That they had for 30 years previous.
that Linda Stewart had given that family 30 years previous.
So we have moved beyond that for sure. So let's talk about what survivors are telling us across the country. Because with the National Center, we have a lot of experience in doing focus group with survivors. And we're going to do 2 focus groups here this week. And we're super excited to learn from them, talk about what's happening in your community. But across the country, it's pretty consistent of what they tell us regardless of what community that we're in. They are fearful of systems. They don't understand the process because it's a complicated process. And sometimes as professionals, sometimes we don't understand what that is. Court is number 1 the scariest place that they go. It doesn't matter. Like, every courthouse across the country is scary, and it's like a conspiracy that all the floors look the same in every courthouse. I don't understand it, but that's just the way it is. Shelters are the safest place. They do feel that way. Victims go to place to place to place consistently, no matter what community we're in. That's what they're telling us. They must tell their story over and over and over again and relive that traumatic experience. And consistently, when you present this idea of if we put all of our services in one location, Would you like that? Yes. I mean, consistently, it's yes across the board. They never raised their hand and said, yes, I would love to go to 15 different places or 30 different places. Would we like to go to one place? Absolutely. The answer is always yes.
Yeah, what survivors tell us over and over and over again is really two things most consistently. What they want in a family justice center. They want a place where they can go where all their services are in one place, and part of that is they want to not have to tell their story over and over again. And then the other thing they tell us is they want to be safe in that place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And talk about the history.
Yeah. So the vision for a family justice center started way back in the last century, as Gail and Casey would say, in 1989. Casey Gwinn was the elected city attorney in San Diego. And it was his job to prosecute domestic violence cases in San Diego. And what he discovered along the way was that it was a mess for victims to have to go to multiple places. And not only was it a mess for victims, but it was a mess for him as someone who was trying to provide and coordinate services for victims and survivors of domestic violence. And so they started slowly but surely bringing in partners in San Diego into the prosecutor's office and developed this idea that let's just all get together in one place and let's start working together. And so here's sort of the timeline of how things have evolved for survivors of domestic violence. And we don't really have to go through this in detail because a lot of you know this and a lot of you have lived at least part of this history. But what started in the 60s and 70s with shelters and just a sort of a beginning of an understanding, better understanding of the nature of domestic violence, policy, and we began to see a policy shift from viewing domestic violence as something that was a private matter between two people within a home. We certainly began to understand that's not how domestic violence should be viewed. And so with the opening of shelters in the 60s and 70s, then over the next 10 to 20 years, began to see changes in policy and the law, and in the 80s and 90s, coordinated community responses with councils and task force. And then, as you know, in 1994, thanks in large part to good work from people from Delaware, the Violence Against Women Act, groundbreaking federal legislation, and then through the 90s and 2000s, the development of systems, specialized courts and law enforcement units, pro-arrest policies, changes in training. One key, of course, is evidence-based prosecution. And then the advent of child advocacy centers, which is the bringing together of multiple agencies, the collaboration and integration of services for victims of child abuse, really provided a model or a template that showed us the way for how to serve survivors of domestic violence more effectively. So it started with an initiative, as I said, of the police chief and city attorney in San Diego, with the bringing together of professionals from multiple agencies co-located under one roof. And the key was reducing the amount of times and that victims had to tell their stories, the number of places they had to go to get the help they needed. And the end result was that they saved lives. Mm-hmm. They dramatically reduced the number of domestic violence homicides in San Diego and its surrounding area, which, as you know, is a huge urban center.
Yeah, and I think that they will also tell you, Gail and Casey, if they were here with us today, they would tell you that they weren't the first co-located model necessarily, but what they did do is they were the first co-located model specific to addressing domestic violence and did it larger than anyone else had ever done, with more than 20 partner agencies on site at one location. So they definitely started that, had that credit, and built momentum. And this is where we kind of now see the movement today. So let's talk about what we kind of see here. Now, you all are the experts in Delaware. We are not. But this is some data that the Coordinating Council provided to us about some of your domestic violence incidents. So over a 5-year period, kind of the number of incidents, what we've seen on your short forms, and then your number of domestic violence incident reports as well.
Yeah, and Mo and Laura talked about this earlier, and so we don't need to go into great detail. But obviously, I think what you can say about the communities here in Delaware, what you can say about every community in the United States of America, is that you have a domestic violence problem here.
100%.
But you're not, as I said, you're not unique. That's true in every corner of this country. And I think the other thing that's true, it's actually impressive that there are a reduction in some of your numbers over the last couple of years. But I bet it's true here, as it's true in other places, that the reality is there has been an increase in sort of the severity of domestic violence. We've seen consistently across the country, as a result of the pandemic, an increase in dramatically violent incidents of domestic violence. There's been a consistent increase of domestic violence homicides across the country as a result of the pandemic. And so this is a great time to be talking about developing a family justice center, not only because the need is greater right now, and I think we run a risk if we assume that as the pandemic slows or comes to an end, whatever that's going to be, I think we make a mistake if we assume that the domestic violence numbers are automatically going to rebound to pre-pandemic numbers. You know, the truth is, things like a pandemic can create lasting, sometimes permanent changes in different aspects of our culture. So I think we have to be really assertive about turning those numbers around and changing the reality for survivors of domestic violence. The other thing that's good about your timing is that there are a lot of resources right now that are focused on preventing domestic violence, intervening in incidents of domestic violence, because there is this recognition that the pandemic has exacerbated problems for survivors of domestic violence. So your timing is great because there are resources that are concentrated on our issue right now.
So a victim's journey, what they might need: temporary protective order, medical treatment, children's advocate, police investigation, advocacy, civil legal services. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And I think that was identified in all of the shapes that Laura had and presented earlier. So what does that journey look like? What is someone in a vehicle? How long does it take them to get to point A to point B? What if someone can't be gone for more than 1 hour without raising suspicion? What if we have shelter-in-place orders again? And if we ever went back to that, the isolation within the home. And so I think looking at mobility and those sorts of things is part of this journey.
And we also have to ask the question, what if an abuser is tracking their victim, either their exact location, or what if they are tracking the number of miles that they're driving in any given day? How much more difficult are we making it for a victim of domestic violence to get the help they need if we're forcing them to drive all over the place to get the help they need?
I mean, we had, from one of our smaller jurisdictions, literally just last week, we had a victim who left the police department and to travel to the Family Justice Center in Fort Worth. It was about a 20-minute drive, and her abuser was trying to run her off the highway while she was trying to get to the Family Justice Center. And as soon as she did walk in our doors, we had an immediate response, because the law enforcement's an on-site partner of ours, as he had rammed her vehicle and trying to hurt her on her way to get to safety. So, I mean, that's just last week of one of many stories that we see, and I'm sure that those situations unfortunately happen here as well. So you want to talk about the cost to the community?
Yeah, so let's flip one of the questions that you get asked as you're considering the development of a family justice center is how much is this going to cost? Is it
Always
worth the
about
cost?
money. Always
Right.
about money.
So the truth is, it does take investment to develop a family justice center. There's no question. But let me flip that on its head and ask you, what does it cost to not develop a family justice center? What is the cost of not coordinating services? What is the cost of not collaborating? What is the cost of not bringing services together under one roof? And I think the ultimate cost is that there is greater loss of life. One thing that we know and that we can demonstrate that we have seen from the impact of family justice centers around the country is that when you build an effective family justice center community, one of the impacts is that you lessen the loss of life as it relates to domestic violence. And while you can't put a price on that, there is a measurable cost to the community of dealing with any domestic violence homicide. It looks a little bit different in every community, but I know about 11 years ago, when we were going through the development of family justice centers when we were looking at the development of family justice center in Fort Worth, we looked at what the cost of every domestic violence homicide in Fort Worth was, and that time it was more than $2 million.
11 years ago.
11 years ago in the state of Texas. So when you look at the cost of everything from healthcare expense, and that's the cost to the community, not the cost to the victim or their family, but you look at healthcare costs, mental health care costs, the costs of providing care to children who are impacted by domestic violence, lost work productivity, the cost of policing and courts and incarceration. It is just nearly impossible to add up all the costs, and so when you prevent those homicides, you save real dollars for a community, and of course the biggest benefit, which is preventing the loss of life, you cannot put a value on. But I would also add there are efficiencies in developing a family justice center. So while you do need to make an investment to build a family justice center, there are great efficiencies. You do realize cost savings with co-location. And I think one of the best benefits we have seen in Fort Worth is that all of the partners of the Family Justice Center, by saving significantly on occupation expenses, have been able to use those the resources they've saved there and invest those back into expanding their capacity to serve survivors, both to serve more survivors and to provide more services to those survivors. So here's what the process is going to look like with the development of Family Justice Center for Delaware. We're going to spend the next few days conducting a study tour, and the whole point of this is for us to learn more about your community, the assets that you have here in place here that puts you in a great position. And by the way, I do think from everything I've seen now that y'all have some great resources in place. You have a great sense of collaboration. The work of the DVCC puts you sort of miles and miles ahead of where a lot of other communities are in being prepared to develop a family justice center. But we're going to look at both your advantages and opportunities, but also look at some challenges and potential stumbling blocks. And then about 30 days after the study tour, we'll provide a written report that provides our assessment of where your community is. Then we will work with the DVCC to plan to bring our team back to conduct a few days of strategic planning. And that's where you all are going to come together. And so, by the way, through this, we're not going to tell you what a family justice center should look like in Delaware. And as many different family justice centers as there are, well, there are that many different concepts of what a family justice center should look like. And so we're going to work with you to help you develop your vision of what the most effective family justice center is going to look like in Delaware. And that's going to involve the creation of working groups and an implementation team that will take the strategic plan that we develop together in our next process and do the work that it takes to lay the groundwork to build Family Justice Center. And one of the key components of that is engaging key community partners and engaging the community as a whole to build not only a vision, but a shared vision for Family Justice Center in Delaware.
And the only difference between a vision and a hallucination is a really funny video.
How many people see it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to mess that up.
If you've learned a lot about leadership and making a movement, then let's watch a movement happen start to finish in under 3 minutes and dissect some lessons. First, of course, a leader needs the guts to stand alone and look ridiculous. But what he's doing is so simple, it's almost instructional. This is key. You must be easy to follow. Now here comes the first follower with a crucial role. He publicly shows everyone else how to follow. Notice how the leader embraces him as an equal. So it's not about the leader anymore, it's about them, plural. Notice how he's calling to his friends to join in. So it takes guts to be a first follower. You stand out and you brave ridicule yourself. Being a first follower is an underappreciated form of leadership. The first follower transforms a lone nut into a leader. If the leader is the flint, the first follower is the spark that really makes the fire. Now here's the second follower. This is a turning point. It's proof the first has done well. Now it's not a lone nut and it's not two nuts. 3 is a crowd and a crowd is news. A movement must be public. Make sure outsiders see more than just the leader. Everyone needs to see the followers because new followers emulate followers, not the leader. Now here come 2 more people, then 3 more immediately. Now we've got momentum. This is the tipping point, and now we have a movement. As more people jump in, it's no longer risky. If they were on the fence before, there's no reason not to join in now. They won't stand out, they won't be ridiculed, and they will be part of the in crowd if they hurry. And over the next minute, you'll see the rest who prefer to stay part of the crowd, because eventually they'd be ridiculed for not joining. And ladies and gentlemen, that is how a movement is made. So let's recap what we've learned. If you are a version of the shirtless dancing guy, all alone, remember the importance of nurturing your first few followers as equals, making everything clearly about the movement, not you. Be public, be easy to follow. But the biggest lesson here, did you catch it? Leadership is overglorified. Yes, it started with the shirtless guy, and he'll get all the credit, but you saw what really happened. It was the first follower that transformed a lone nut into a leader. There's no movement without the first follower. See, we're told that we all need to be leaders, but that would be really ineffective. The best way to make a movement, if you really care, is to courageously follow and show others how to follow. When you find a lone nut doing something great, have the guts to be the first person to stand up and join in.
Y'all are on the lone nut to movement continuum, but you're definitely past the lone nut part. So whoever it is that was the original lone nut, we certainly appreciate you, and we're glad to be a part of it. But y'all already have lots of people on board, and you're in a great position to achieve success. So here's kind of the big vision, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, a future where all the needs of victims are met, children are protected, violence fades and doesn't escalate, aggressors are held accountable, economic justice increases, families heal and thrive through their journey, hope is realized, and we all work together.
Yeah, and let's just note too, like we're realists too. We understand that this work is hard, and so we all work together. It's not something that happens magically, and it's not something that that you ever put on cruise control, right? So from the beginning, right now, I know that it takes work and commitment to say that as a community, with all of these agencies that have existed sort of singularly for generations, that it takes a lot to say we're going to commit that we're going to work together in a way that is unprecedented, and then it takes a different kind of commitment to stick to that across not just years but generations.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so here's the grand opening of the San Diego Family Justice Center back in 2002. And there in the center, holding the scissors, is Casey Gwen, who again was the elected city attorney at the time in San Diego. And so you ask, well, how did this thing go from one Family Justice Center in San Diego to a national movement? Well, the simple answer is Oprah heard about it, and she did 2 episodes about the San Diego Family Justice Center.
And forever told Casey Gwen that his life would be changed.
Yeah.
So then it was. We won't play that video.
We won't play the whole video, but yeah. So Oprah featured it, and then folks in Washington took note of it, and it became a presidential initiative to spread the Family Justice Center movement across the country. And it was President George W. Bush, actually, that said, we're going to build Family Justice Centers across the country, and asked Casey and Gail to lead that effort. So there was an original Family Justice Center initiative, as I said, out of the Department of Justice. And so there were, and they're out of that first grant, they actually built Family Justice Centers.
15.
Yeah, 15 original Family Justice Centers, and these are those original centers under the first president's initiative.
And so then that kind of leads a pathway into One Safe Place, because we actually, in 2004, when that initial presidential grant came out, we in Fort Worth, Texas, Tarrant County, our county, just to kind of give you an idea, is about 2 million population now to date in our county. We're about 1.8 probably when we were building our Family Justice Center. We have 42 municipalities in our one county, which means I have 42 separate law enforcement agencies to work with, which was something that no one really had ever done in that 15 initial presidential grant. In our community, we applied for that grant. We were denied. We did not get the funding for that. And honestly, the project for us just kind of went away. It just like disappeared, which was kind of maybe a little bit similar to Judge Knoll's comments that in 2005 here in Delaware, it was identified previously and recommended to build a Family Justice Center, but for one reason or another, it may not have just gotten the momentum, and maybe the timing wasn't right. For us looking back, I can't imagine what would have happened if we would have gotten that initial presidential grant. We weren't ready for a project of that magnitude at that time. So looking back, it was a blessing that we didn't get that grant all those years ago. What we also didn't have back then is we didn't have a coordinating council in our community. So no one was really talking about the issues of domestic violence until we all came together for this massive federal grant. So what we decided at that point in time is when we didn't get the grant is what at least was happening is we needed to continue to come to the table and talk. And we had a local judge in our county that said, hey, maybe we should all keep talking. So she really brought everyone together, and we built what we now call the Tarrant County Council on Family Violence that is still operating. And as a result of that coordinating council coming together, we then had, pretty similar to your design here in Delaware, we then basically had a committee that we developed to look at, hey, what's happening with Family Justice Centers across the country? Because by the time about 2007, that we began in our journey to look at that, Well, now there were about 60 open centers, and more of them had done it in communities without that initial federal seed money. So that was kind of intriguing to us. So we began the planning process for us. We had some champions that came along. We had a chief of police for Fort Worth, and at the time I actually worked for Fort Worth Police Department as a victim advocate. And he wanted a family justice center. He came from Phoenix, Arizona, where they had multidisciplinary agencies and family advocacy centers and family justice centers across the state there in Arizona. And he said, "Where's ours?" In Texas. And we were like, "Well, let me tell you what our journey is, Chief." And he was really our first champion that connected with Ken, connected with our private companies, with our mayor, with our city council at the time, and really began to launch. And so what we did at that point under the chief's leadership is I actually wrote a grant to contract with Alliance for Hope International, exactly the process that you all are going through, and really led that planning process. I remember Ken had his job at the crime prevention organization. I had mine at the police department. We had someone else that was on our law enforcement and our private business sector side. And at some point in the study tour process, I think we asked our facilitators, so at what point in time do we need to have someone that's coordinating this? Because we're all doing our full-time jobs and trying to do the planning. And they were like, "You are well beyond having a full-time person to lead your planning." So at that point, Ken went to the chief of police and asked if they could have me. And our running joke is that the chief was like, "Yeah, take her." I was like, "You didn't even fight to keep me." And so at that point, I literally boxed up my office one day, moved to Ken's office, and began our multi-year planning process to open our doors. So here on the slide, some of our pictures. This is what One Safe Place looks like today. This is when we opened our doors to this facility. We started in phases. Phase one is what Ken and I refer to it. He was like, "You got to stop saying that, Michelle." I'm like, "We're just going to own it." We had 6 double wide trailers. We had 2 triple wide trailers. It was literally the trailer park that we put on the corner. It was gorgeous. Survivors didn't care. That was the point of it. But while we started in our phase one, we were continuing to dream big to what you see on the screen. And so that is our current home. We moved in there October of 2014. And then that's a picture of our lobby space that still looks the same today. And then I want to show you a video. This is something that we started very quickly after our study tour process of how do we paint the picture to our community.
Fear, confusion, pain, tears, hopelessness, isolation, death, domestic violence, and sexual abuse. The problem is all around us.
This happened February 19th of 2005. He had gone to Lisa's house that night. The minute he walked in the door, he hit her in the face. He brutally beat her until he had her on the ground and smothered her. And that's when Jaden walked in. And he killed Jaden also. Jaden was just a little boy. And lots of fun. Lots of fun. Lisa was my only child. She was 6 months pregnant with a little girl.
When I was about 18, maybe 19 years old, I know my oldest brother went off to college, so I was the only person left in the home. And my 2 older sisters had moved on in relationships, still in South Florida. My sister was involved in a pretty bad car accident. She was in a lot of pain, but because of her pregnancy, she was really not capable of being mobile. One night, I remember distinctively that she called me, and it wasn't her normal tone of voice. And she had called me and told me she just needed me over there immediately, but don't tell Mom and Dad. I remember walking into the bathroom, and she was on the floor, and there was a little bit of blood, and I had thought maybe she had fallen. I helped her walk back to the bed and talked to her a little bit, and she said that her husband beat her and kind of forced her to have sex with him, even though that was against doctor's orders. Her emotions that night and the weight now that I carried, I didn't know what to do. I was just a teenager.
The cycle of domestic violence and abuse ultimately affects us all and leaves in its wake a haunted path of terror and devastation greater than any natural disaster. The cycle must stop. The need is real. It is urgent. The problem is solvable.
In Tarrant County in 2009, we had almost 15,000 reported cases. And, I think we all realize that for every reported case, there's probably at least one that's not.
Domestic violence and sexual abuse affect us physically, emotionally, and economically.
If we had one facility, then every city would have to recreate the facility or the services.
North Texas is the fastest growing metropolitan region in America. The quality of life and economic vitality we enjoy today are unsustainable if we ignore complex social issues. A smart, comprehensive strategy for dealing with domestic violence and sexual assault is critical to controlling crime and violence.
More than likely, and a lot of the studies have been done, have shown that vicarious modeling that they get from the parents, that they learn that this is the way to be in a relationship.
We know that about 70% of adults that are violent have experienced violence in the home themselves or were exposed to violence between their parents.
Because of our explosive population growth and increasing lack of mobility, it is absolutely imperative we build one easily accessible place where victims of domestic violence and sexual assault can get the help they need.
If we can drastically reduce the number of children who are growing up in homes where there is domestic violence, and we can do that with One Safe Place, then we're not just improving the lives of those individuals, but we are building safer communities for the long haul.
There are already outstanding services being provided in this community for victims of domestic violence and sexual abuse. The Alliance for Children, Safe Haven, the Women's Center, and many others are doing great work.
One Safe Place won't duplicate these efforts. One Safe Place will provide the framework for greater collaboration and teamwork.
The day we are successful here, and the day we open our doors, and the day I know that collectively our community came together to build such an amazing place, that'll be the day I call my sister and tell her I answered that painful memory.
To everybody who's involved, the donors, the people putting this together, the people who pioneered this, the good folks from all the agencies who were collaborating and coming together and making this thing happen, is you are giving a lot of people their lives back. And that's gratifying. And it's a beautiful thing. And thank you.
The need is real. It is urgent. And it is time for action now. Join us and help break the tragic cycle of domestic violence and sexual abuse. Together, we will forge a living legacy of helping victims become survivors. We can change the future.
My name is Joel Glenn. I'm chairman of the Safe City Commission. I'm in. After serving 15 years as a special agent for the United States Secret Service and 30 years as vice president and director of security for the Bass Companies, I can say this with authority. Building a family justice center is the most important crime prevention initiative we can implement. We have a spectacular performing arts center, a magnificent world-class zoo, amazing museums, great rodeo and livestock facilities, and the most extraordinary stadiums in the world. If we can build these masterpieces, we can accomplish this as well. When we open the doors to One Safe Place, our homes, our streets, and our communities will be safer for all of us. This is our vision. I really need your help. Can I count you in?
I'm in.
I am in.
I'm in.
I'm in. Are you in?
I'm in. We're in.
I'm 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 in.
We're in.
We're in. We're in. We're in. We're in. We're in. We're in. We're in. We're in.
Are you in? One safe place. We can change the future.
So I want to make a note of something here. The building matters, right? What you build, how you build it matters. One of the things that focus groups of survivors tell us over and over again is that they don't feel respected, that they have felt disrespected by their abusers. Often over time, they feel disrespected by their kids as they begin to mimic behavior that the abusive parent has modeled. And they don't particularly feel respected by the systems that are built to serve them. So one of the things we decided from the start, and I think family justice centers across the country now are deciding, is that it is important to create a space, to build a place that communicates from the time a survivor walks in the door, it communicates that you respect them. It communicates that they are worth the investment. Mm-hmm. Now, that being said, the building matters, but family justice centers are definitely more than just a building, and what's on the inside matters the most.
Absolutely. And so we have this, once again, shapes for you of all the different visions of things that should be located in a family justice center. And this is when you all move into your next planning phases, we'll decide what works for you all in your center. At One Safe Place in Fort Worth, I mean, we have, to date, I have 24 newest. I just added another partner agency. So we have 24 agencies that are providing services. People that aren't familiar with the Family Justice Center framework, what I try to do to simplify the complexities of the 24 partner agencies that we have, how I talk about it in that framework is, I think that's all of the circles on the page. How I talk about it is really a family justice center has three main components as partners. Number one, the criminal justice system. So law enforcement, prosecution, those sorts of centers. If you go to a DV shelter-based organization, you don't walk in and have law enforcement or prosecutors that are there. So really looking at criminal justice system partners and who needs to be present. The second main partner is civil legal services. The number one requested need in family justice centers across the country is civil legal services. Anything from divorce to child custody, restraining orders, protective orders, immigration services, all of those civil legal services. And so what does that look like and how do you get those partners on site? And then the third main component is then all the social service agencies. At least for Fort Worth, and I'm pretty sure this is also consistent across the country, of what we're seeing is the second most common needs that survivors of domestic violence are asking for is advocacy and counseling services. So, and that's just where then you get to really think outside the box of all those social service agencies on what you could possibly co-locate and put underneath one umbrella.
And y'all are going to decide what your framework looks like in Delaware. But I will say the more common practices of the newer family justice centers that develop are the co-location of shelters with family justice centers, the co-location of child advocacy centers with family justice centers, and then increasingly we are seeing services for victims of trafficking as part of the family justice center framework. So, and to move on with sort of the best and most promising practices, in addition to those commonly sought services, more and more we're seeing a need for health services integrated with social, legal, and the behavioral health services, the integration of both prevention and intervention efforts, addressing child welfare and domestic violence concurrently. And so I would encourage you from the start with the development of Family Justice Center to think about building a system that serves child witnesses. I would encourage you to think about child witnesses as victims in their own right, who have been victimized in their own right, who need to be assessed and who need to be connected to services, because we know that children who are exposed to domestic violence in the home are 1,500% more likely to ultimately be seriously neglected or physically abused. And we also know that children who witness domestic violence experience the same emotional and mental challenges that children who are physically abused experience. And then, of course, we have to think about expanding sustainable civil legal services and building a model, again, that works right for Delaware. And then increasingly, we are expanding the framework in the field to include all societal sectors, working with trauma-exposed adults and children, and thinking about poly-victimization, otherwise recognizing that victims are experiencing victimization beyond the domestic violence or trafficking or whatever the victimization is that they're presenting with. So won't spend a lot of time on this, but these things we know are critical to the success of a family justice center. Leadership matters. Not only who it is that's creating the vision and who it is that is ultimately governing a center broadly, but who are those individuals who are leading the team, leading the Family Justice Center, learning from and implementing best practices and y'all are in a great place with more than 130 operating family justice centers across the country. We decided it was way better not to be first because we could benefit from the work of others that had gone on around the country, and so you're in a great place. Then we have some common guiding principles that we'll look at in just a second, and then embedded in everything we do is being accountable to and led by survivors. And so here are just a few of our guiding principles. We won't talk about them all because we want to be sure we get to everything we need to. We want to be not only culturally responsive, but we want to be, and I hate the term culturally competent because competent seems like such a low bar, but we want to be experts in serving everyone that walks through the door, no matter what their background is. Whether if they're part of the LGBTQ community, whatever their cultural background is, we want to put ourselves in a position to serve them in an expert manner.
And I think when we started this journey from the history that we that Ken began with of what happened in San Diego, what we really saw is the Start Small really had three foundational prongs, if you will: advocacy, law enforcement, prosecution, and civil legal services. Like that was kind of like the core. What we've seen in this movement and evolution is now much bigger. Now we've added the counseling and child resource rooms and adult play therapy rooms, multidisciplinary teams, child abuse, sexual assaults are now coming underneath the Family Justice Center framework, where that historically is not where it started. More social services, housing services. Ken mentioned the shelter component. That's a really progressive movement. I love it. I want to see more of them open that have that component. More cultural competency, ensuring that we can speak multiple languages at family justice centers. And then the dreams just keep getting bigger, where we see wellness centers, mental health centers, integration of counseling, meditation. I even know a center that's doing some karaoke. We're seeing those medical examination rooms and prevention and incorporating health. And as we know, domestic violence and trauma is a public health issue. So addressing that under family justice centers, self-sufficiency, job training, dress for success, childcare, camping, mentoring. So as you can see, the dream just continues to get bigger, and I don't know, Delaware could just even get even bigger here as well. So all at the key of
Yeah, being accountable to your survivors. And about this, I will just say, we know you are committed from the beginning to being accountable to your survivors, because a key to the voices we'll be hearing over the next 3 days are, we're going to be talking directly to your survivors. And so I would encourage you from the very beginning to, as part of your planning, think about creating a Voices chapter that engages your survivor community, and then think about including survivors in your governance structure. At One Safe Place, we're a 501c3 nonprofit agency that's leading the Family Justice Center, but we have 2 members of our original Voices committee that are on our board of directors and are now our bosses.
And I will say that when we started this journey and when we were doing our study tour and I heard about accountability of survivors and adding them into the governance structure, I was skeptical. I was like, I'm sorry, what? And over time, I have understood and have grown to see the significance and importance of that. It has really helped us accomplish a lot of pitfalls, really just staying critical to being survivor driven and victim centered. But I wanted to do it in a way that it was safe for survivors to do that. And so I can definitely walk you all through why I was skeptical and how to overcome those fears. And we'll kind of walk through that journey alongside y'all.
Yeah, I think it's also important to mention, don't hesitate to lean on your survivors to do some real practical things too. Yeah. So we often, when we're developing a new brochure, and though brochures aren't our only type of engagement now, they're still an important part of our engagement. So we don't put that out in the public before our survivors have looked at the draft and given us feedback on the language and the look. And by the way, it always changes after we have talked to our survivors. We even work with our survivors to determine the right messaging for our social media engagement. So there's really not much we do that we don't consult with our survivors about. So I want to talk to you about, from the very beginning, incorporating, benefiting from the work of the Training Institute on Strangulation. We know, and again, I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, but victims of domestic violence who have been strangled are in a different kind of danger. They are 750% more likely to ultimately be killed by their abuser. And we know that men who strangle their intimate partner are not just a greater danger to their intimate partner, they're a greater danger to the community as a whole. And so start this process by incorporating the work of the Training Institute and benefiting from the work of the Training Institute. I'll tell you what I mean by that. When we started our operation of our Family Justice Center 10 years ago, and we developed our intake process, part of that process was doing a danger assessment, a lethality assessment. We used Dr. Jackie Campbell's assessment from the beginning. And so because we did that, we asked each victim whether or not they had been strangled. We got a yes or no answer to that question, and that was the end of the work that we did with individual victims around strangulation. Well, after bringing in the Institute to do a 4-day course in Fort Worth at One Safe Place and having a number of teams of people that were involved in that training, we learned that day that we had to change everything, and we developed a whole new process for how we serve survivors of strangulation. And unless Michelle has something to add, we'll kind of leave it there. But I know you've already had the Institute here in this community. So just I would encourage you, incorporate what you've learned from the Institute right from the beginning with the development of your Family Justice Center. Yeah. And then the next slide you'll see will be for Camp Hope America, where we've
So it has a lot of different camp pictures, and it doesn't want to load very well for everyone.
Yeah, so what we do want to say is also benefit from the work of Camp Hope America. And as I said, I think it's important with every Family Justice Center to build a system that serves child witnesses. For us in Fort Worth and for many centers around the country, that system sort of revolves around Camp Hope, which is It is a week-long sort of traditional summer camp for kids, but that has a hope-based curriculum built into it, and we can say now that curriculum is evidence-based, and we are evaluating the results of Camp Hope, so we know that not only during that week of camp are we increasing the level of hopefulness for our campers, but that increase in hopefulness is sustained over time. And then along with Camp Hope is for us, it's a monthly program we call Pathways to Hope, so that we are engaged year-round in mentoring with our child witnesses. And so Camp Hope, for us and for many, has become sort of the entry point for our child witnesses to receive services through the Family Justice Center. And I would just like to add, when you serve a survivor's child or children, it's not just that you are doing good things for that child, but you're building a stronger relationship with the adult survivor parent of that child as well, so that you are increasing trust. And what we have seen is that we tend to have longer relationships with the parents of our Camp Hope campers than with other survivors.
I remember the day last year, so we were going into our 9th year of camp, 10th year, just celebrated our 10th year of the Family Justice Center, and last year we were doing one of our pathway activities, and I remember one of our kids that started with us 9 years ago is now one of our cabin counselors and has 4 additional siblings, so there's 5 kids. And we had graduated to the point to where every sibling in that family was in one of our age groups at our camp. And then I just remember thinking, we have a minimum of like another 10 years with this family, and we just had 9 years with them,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's 20-year relationship with one family. So when Ken talks about like the sustainable, building those relationships with those families, like when I was able to see them just walking through the pathway to our building one day, like it just hit me of how many years we had been connected and how many more years that we had, and how that is really a huge catalyst for us breaking that generational cycle of violence that we never really had before we implemented the framework of the Family Justice Center.
Yeah, Camp Hope has been transformational for us and for lots of communities across the country. And so we'll just end it by saying we have a great Camp Hope America team at the Alliance that has a great process for developing Camp Hope programs in communities. And they will walk with you hand in hand for the development of Camp Hope programming, and you get some time to do it right. The first year involves being a Camp Hope readiness site, and you have the opportunity to actually embed staff members in operating ongoing camps, and so we're at the Voices.
So then Voices, obviously, Ken's already mentioned, is a national chapter of survivors at each center. They work on various projects. Ours in Fort Worth, it's one of their staples. We do a beauty brunch every October and really invite current active Family Justice Center clients to that beauty brunch and treat them to a day. There's a lot of engagement, a lot of empowerment to the survivors, giving back to those. And it's really a rewarding and empowering process that they can talk to their peers about their journey and relate and really encourage our active clients that they too can move into that survivor role. And so across the country, National Voices is doing a lot of amazing work.
Yeah, and we mentioned the Justice Legal Network, and I think we mentioned it in context with the Justice Project that is looking at cold cases and instances where crime scenes have been staged to look like suicides across the country. But in addition, the Justice Legal Network is working to develop best practices for how to expand and make sustainable civil legal services in family justice centers across the country.
Oh, and this is awesome. We got to talk about some statewide legislation that's happening.
Yeah, and I think nobody is better situated across the country to develop statewide legislation than you are here in Delaware. But basically what we're talking about is having a statute that defines the existence of family justice centers. And we've got a couple of examples here. And your statewide legislation may or may not at the beginning have funding mechanisms in it, but it is important to define the existence of family justice centers in your state law. And increasingly, one of the reasons that's important, I believe, is that we're seeing more and more grants out of the Department of Justice that call out family justice centers as being specifically appropriate for different kinds of funding. And so when you can say in a grant application that our center is a family justice center as defined in our state law, I think that takes you a step forward. So let's talk a little more about what the Family Justice Center framework looks like in different places around the country. So more than anything else, Family Justice Center is about sharing resources. It is not about replacing or duplicating programs. So when you're talking about developing a Family Justice Center and having all of these different services available at one place, it doesn't mean that there is a new agency that is all of a sudden going to provide all these services. It recognizes that there are agencies that have been, in most places, providing these services for generations that are doing a great job. It's not about creating new resources to recreate the services and service providers that are already existing. It is providing one platform, one facility where those different agencies and different programs can coexist, providing greater access to services. And by the way, it's not just about the co-location. You get halfway there with the co-location. It's about cooperating and integrating those services, because if you just all go into one location and you're not working together, the victim is still, they're going to be in one building, but they're still going to have to tell their story over and over again. So half the magic is co-location, the other half is the integration. So there are lots of different governance structures, and we're not here to tell you which structure is best for you in Delaware. We have lots of centers across the country that are successful that are led by a governmental agency. They may be led by a city or county. They may be led through the mayor's office. Some of them are literally a department of the mayor's office. We have a lot of centers that are led by a police department or a law enforcement agency. Have centers that are led by district attorney's offices. We have nonprofit led agencies, and some of those are led by an existing domestic violence program or shelter. Some are led by a domestic violence council. Some, like Fort Worth, are led by a more comprehensive crime prevention agency. And sometimes there's a new nonprofit entity that is created to lead the Family Justice Center.
A lot of different options across the country for governance structures.
So, nothing stays the same. The Family Justice Center model and framework is evolving as time goes on. We've talked a little bit about that as we go, as we have gone, and we'll speak in a little more specifics about that. So there is a trend, as I mentioned early, toward poly-victimization screening and services. We have actually a grant that has a number of demonstration sites through the Family Justice Center, through the Alliance for Hope, that is exploring how we can create a better system to address poly-victimization.
Well, and I think when we first started, right, so like we built an intake system around domestic violence. So when someone comes to the center, it was a domestic violence intake. And the movement has now evolved in the last 10 years since even we opened our Family Justice Center, where what we know is when people come in and they've experienced one trauma, there's a likelihood that they've experienced more than that one trauma. And so really addressing all the traumas as opposed to just doing one singular domestic violence intake, that we have multiple services on site that can handle someone that has a complex trauma history. And that's what the poly-victimization screening and movement has really progressed to and evolved.
And one of our newer initiatives through the Alliance for Hope is an OVW initiative that looks at the intersection of substance use and domestic violence. And I've actually seen the draft of the toolkit that will be published soon. But I think you'll find we have a lot of. It's going to be a great resource in serving our victims of domestic violence who are experiencing substance use. And by the way, that can mean that the victim is experiencing substance use issues. It could mean that the perpetrator is experiencing substance use issues, and sometimes both. Go ahead, Michelle.
Well, and then we've got health and prevention. We've got clinics. I mean, Mary Claire Landry in New Orleans, one of my favorite people on the planet, opened up her own health and prevention clinic that is federally funded. It's a lot of pain and tears for her to be able to do that, but she exhausted as many partnerships as she possibly could and just really wasn't meeting the needs of her community, and has a state-of-the-art clinic on site. And then Denver in 2019 as well. Also, Margaret has opened up a wonderful center there in Denver.
Yeah, and I think as you're exploring the different ways that you are going to serve survivors who have been strangled, really look closely at the ability to do forensic exams within your family justice center.
They're doing forensic exams. Mary Claire's doing behavioral health, primary health care. I mean, really just looking at how domestic violence and trauma really impacts someone's long-term health, and providing those services underneath the Family Justice Center umbrella. And then you've got high-risk teams, which you all are doing here in Delaware, and how that has a nice fitting in a Family Justice Center. It's all about collaboration, coordination, talking about cases, and seeing where, even after you open a Family Justice Center, what are our continual systematic gaps, and trying to improve what those are. And that's just coordinating and bringing people together to really talk about those high-risk situations and how we can prevent those homicides from happening. And then you've got our potential partners and services. The list just keeps going on and on and on. And then let's talk about where the Family Justice Center movement is right now as we stand.
So there are more than 130 operating family justice centers across the United States. As we said, maybe earlier, they're in 44 states. Right now, that does not include Delaware, so we're looking forward to 44 turning into 45.
Lucky number 45.
That's right. About half of our shelters are coordinated by half of our centers are coordinated by shelters, community-based domestic violence or sexual assault agencies, or new or other 501c3s, and about half are coordinated by governmental agencies. More than 50 communities are in the active planning stages. The first statewide initiative was in California, where there are 24 currently open family justice centers and about 5 that are about to open. This is also not just a United States movement. This is an international movement with centers in 25 countries. And by the way, it runs the gamut. Our centers run the gamut from rural, suburban, urban, you name it. And lots of our centers are in smaller communities. Go ahead, Michelle. So let's talk a little more about benefits and some of the challenges to a dynamic family justice center framework.
So before the Family Justice Center, it would take a week for a client to receive the services that she or he, I'm going to add he on there, needed. Now, he or she can access the same services, if not more services, in less than a day. And we can also help more clients at the same time. And so this next slide is a video. I'm not going to show you the video, but this is what Buncombe County did in their community coordinated response. And it's just a short video of walking through that journey that Laura very diligently showed you, of all the shapes of what that journey looks like specific to you all here in Delaware. The idea, obviously, is reaching more victims. And so this is just kind of some of the numbers that you saw from our friends in San Diego, in New Orleans, that now, as a result of building that Family Justice Center, they're able to reach more people. Nampa was able to see, 11,000 their first year. By year 5, they're at almost 2,500. The Brooklyn and New York Family Justice Center is about 1,800 clients per month. And then so we're reaching more people when you are doing that co-located model. And then Ken mentioned this earlier, and this is obviously one of our core outcome measures, is we want to see that drop in homicides. I mean, that's ultimately what it's about. And you can see across the country, many family justice centers that have done that well and have coordinated services have absolutely improved their homicides in their community.
Yeah, and I just want to note, it's absolutely doable, and it should be your goal to get to 0 domestic violence homicides in the state of Delaware.
Absolutely.
Michelle's going to read this article to you.
No, she is not.
No, but I think one of the great benefits of a family justice center is it gives you an opportunity and a mechanism to really mobilize the community around the issue of domestic violence. I remember a couple of years ago, there was, after a high-profile domestic violence case in the NFL, they did this whole, they did these ads where they talked about how difficult it was to talk about domestic violence. And the truth is, it doesn't have to be. And I think, the development of a Family Justice Center gives you just a new opportunity to mobilize and engage your community around the issues that impact survivors.
And I'll also just give you an example. We never thought in the creation of our Family Justice Center that a couple years ago in Texas, we experienced a horrible freeze that we had never had before. I'm sure everyone across the country heard about it. It was quite a nightmarish situation. And we were contacted by the county and the city if we could open up our Family Justice Center to be a warming center. Many of our residents had experienced power outages. People they were freezing in their homes, and safety is a core issue of ours. And we were fortunate that we had power, we had water, we had electricity. And so they reached out and we said yes, because it was about creating safety for our community.
Yeah, and so once you have developed this model where you're bringing folks together, you're collaborating, and you're building these public-private partnerships, I think one of the things is that you have the opportunity to be an asset to your community in ways that maybe weren't even envisioned at the beginning.
Right.
So another big opportunity is the opportunity to better train staff, not only the staff of the the agency that leads the Family Justice Center, but to better train all of the individuals that are part of the Family Justice Center partnership. So some of the things that we have seen Family Justice Centers do around the country are monthly brown bag or lunch type programs, open houses, and that bring in lots of folks from the community, workshops. We have had a real emphasis at One Safe Place on education and training. And so one of the things you should think about in the development of your Family Justice Center, and when you think about facilities, is make sure you have the space to bring people together, not only to do training, but to do events that really build cultural togetherness with your Family Justice Center team too.
I feel like now we're moving into the dirt of the challenges, right? Yeah. So it's not easy. It's not easy work. I tell people that. And so a lot of the challenges that we have seen across the country and even in our own backyard is egos and turfs. And I don't know, the world of domestic violence, there's power and control with professionals. Yes, of course there is. And so looking at different cultures, right? When you put cops and therapists and social workers and teachers and you put them all together, like those cultures don't naturally mix with one another. And so really how to respect those different cultures now that they're all underneath one roof, and what does that look like, and how do you still solve problems when you have different goals and different disciplines. And so it's kind of like learning to build and fly the plane all at the same time. And so those are a lot of some of the challenges. And I think even us 11 years ago when we were in our planning, it was still just trying to figure it out and being an open book to hear people's concerns and challenges so we could try to problem solve collectively.
Yeah, and I would, so one of the things that we're talking about is taking a lot of agencies that have existed in their own silos for the most part for a long time. I'm not just talking specifically about Delaware. This is with the Family Justice Center movement in general. I'm talking about agencies that have existed in their own silos and bringing them together so that they are no longer operating in a silo. Well, what a lot of people won't say is that they kind of like operating in their silo. There's
easier to work in a silo.
It's more comfortable, and so you definitely take people out of their comfort zone when you're asking them to leave their silo, and that's fundamentally what we're doing. And something that's not on here is that many times a lot of our partners, for example, their entire agency isn't necessarily located at One Safe Place, and so we're asking individuals to leave their mothership, right, and to come work as part of a broader partnership. And so there can be a perception that might not be the best thing for my career to not be officing every day with others in my agency. And so I think one of the things that's important to think about is make sure that you're creating not just a great place for survivors to come, but a great place for people to work as well. And you want to be seen as a center for innovation. You want to be seen as a place where if you want to learn how to do things the right way, if you want to be an innovative person, if you want to learn best practices, you go to the Family Justice Center. So that you want there to be this general, very positive perception about people who have worked as part of a Family Justice Center program.
And I think another challenge, and we heard this, and I hear it in every community that I've done study tours for, and I've been doing study tours for about 4 years now, and it's that funding. Where's the money going to come from, and is that going to compete with others that might already be receiving funding? And so I think it's just an open dialogue and conversation that has to continue to happen from the beginning all the way through when you open the doors of what does that model look like. And there's multiple times that Ken and I were offered an opportunity from a funder to receive funds and then not give it to one of our other nonprofit funders. And we said, no, do not do that. And so I think that's understanding what that funding looks like and how that impacts all of your partners and doing that collaboratively.
So an important part of your planning process as you move toward the strategic planning and the work of work groups and implementation groups is developing a funding model that's sustainable not only for the lead agency, but for your partner agencies as well. And then in terms of maintaining adequate staffing levels, this is true not only for your lead Family Justice Center agency, but for the partners of the Family Justice Center as well. Because one of the things that happens, if you do a Family Justice Center right, you are going to need to increase the capacity of the partner agencies because they are going to be serving more survivors, more clients. So our experience at One Safe Place, and I think this is true in other places as well, 70% of the clients we serve are referred to us by sources other than law enforcement. And what that means is that there are a lot of people coming in for services that otherwise weren't engaging services. So in terms of the number of clients, the number of survivors being served, the pie has gotten bigger, which means the need is bigger, and we all have to enhance or increase our capacity.
And I think the other thing is understanding that there's a tendency to run for cover when things get really difficult. And so when things get really difficult, that's when you have to lean in to this and really open up and be vulnerable. And, a lot of people want to revert back to those silos, and so challenging for that not to happen. And I've been hearing this. I probably have been going to Family Justice Center conference now for about 14 years, and relationships. And that's where we're really seeing communities that thrive are really built on relationships where they can have those hard conversations with partners and overcome those. And sometimes you can agree to disagree. It's okay. But relationships are really important, and it's an ongoing process in the evolution of a Family Justice Center because leadership and people change in positions.
Yeah, and you can't overstate the degree to which you can bring everybody into one building and they can still go back into their own silos.
100%.
So you have to work to make sure that doesn't happen. And then change is a constant challenge for Family Justice Centers. You have to prepare for change in leadership and know that leadership matters a lot. And so that you have to prepare your organization for that and be in a position where you're going not only survive changes in leadership but thrive through changes in leadership, and recognize where you have government-led agencies. Your champion, if it's a mayor or a governor, may have term limits, and even if they don't have term limits, they're not dependent upon one individual championship. Recognize that partners may come and go over the years, and so you may find yourself in a position when a partner leaves, you can't say, oh, well, we're not going to provide that service anymore if that's an important service to your survivors. So you have to make sure that you're able to continue to provide consistent services to the clients of a Family Justice Center through the years. And then recognize that funding priorities change, the economy changes, and you have to be prepared for that. Go ahead, Michelle.
And then you've got the constant growth change in the Family Justice Center service delivery. And I think my explanation of this slide is when I started this process and we were in our phase 1, that trailer park we put on the corner, I kept thinking to myself, man, like if I could just get into that building, if I can get into that building, things will so much slow down for me. And somewhere along some conference, I had this like epiphany, I guess, that was like, yeah, this is never going to slow down. There's always more to do. There's always evolving that has to happen. And so once I kind of settled myself with like, you're always going to be moving to something else and looking at growth and what else do we need to do and what other gaps do we have, I really just kind of, just kind of accepted it, if you will, and just knew that I was always going to be leading an effort that was constantly growing, was constantly changing, and needed to evolve into that momentum. And so that's definitely what we're seeing. And as a result for us specifically, I mean, even in 2020 when there was, a lot of family justice centers across the country unfortunately had to shut and close their doors, we continued to be open and we expanded our framework to include human trafficking and added new programming on site.
Yeah, and we glossed over a bullet point earlier that is relationships matter, and relationships require constant work. So you got to build those relationships as you're developing the center, and then you got to keep working on them after you open the center as well.
And then we changed that ending with the power of we, which I've heard Gail Strack quote this. I've also heard Denise McCain in Maryland quote this, that it really begins with the power of all of us.
Yeah. So this work is increasingly informed by evaluation, and so I encourage you from the beginning of this process to think about how you are going to evaluate the work of your Family Justice Center, and how do you get beyond just measuring the number of people that are served, the number of intakes, but you begin to really think about what are the outcomes that you want to explore. And so think about evaluation committees and focus groups. We do a lot of client surveys at One Safe Place and in family justice centers around the country. And the good thing is when you are starting new as you are today, you can think about what are the numbers we need to benchmark, what are the numbers we need to capture today so that we're able to compare them over time after the opening of a family justice center, and engage, figure out who your university partners are going to be and engage them from the very beginning.
I mean, a family justice center concept with criminal justice to civil legal to social services is like we have a child care center on site. I mean, it is like a just playground for them and all the different disciplines and majors that you could potentially go into, of potential for resources for interns and opportunities, and then that research, and then really investing with your university partners to conduct said research, and then that should ultimately affect and drive practice.
Yeah. So I just want to mention that, and we won't go through all this specifically, but it's just to note that the work of family justice centers is evidence-based. That our practices are evidence-based, and outcomes have been evaluated not just by us, but by outside evaluators. And so think about how you're going to do that from the beginning.
And the pie is getting bigger. It's bringing in new funds and making new friends. We've got multiple history of collaboration on Blueprint for Safety, Witness Intimidation Project, Children Exposed to Domestic Violence Initiative, Homicide Prevention Initiative, National Poly-Victimization, OVW and OBC grants.
And I just think this is one of the things in the question of or the concern about creating competition for funding. What we have found across the country is the truth is that the collaboration that the Family Justice Center creates actually creates an opportunity for new sources of funding.
Absolutely.
And we talked about this before. I would love to spend 30 more minutes talking about it. It's
kind of like his baby.
It is. But I just can't stress enough the degree to which it's important to create services for child witnesses and for children. And I will tell you, so one of the things that was most impactful to me when considering whether our agency should take on the leadership of the Family Justice Center model was learning that the majority of criminals populating our prisons specifically violent offenders. The majority of offenders in our prisons grew up in homes where there's domestic violence. So if we build family justice centers, if we build systems that serve survivors of domestic violence without addressing the needs of child witnesses, then we are just chasing our tails. We may be serving the needs of a victim well in a given moment of time, but we're not going to impact the numbers from a generational perspective.
And then domestic violence collaboratives, family justice center, multi-agency centers should be experts in, here you go, you ready? The list just goes on and on and on. Collaboration, integrated approaches to addressing family violence, sexual assault, community engagement, outreach, homicide prevention, handling strangulation assaults, aggressive intervention with offenders and holding those offenders accountable, addressing the health needs of victims and their kids, addressing childhood trauma, what are the best trauma models in America, hope, healing, and providing community for survivors and their children.
Yeah, and as we talked about, or as it mentioned on the slide earlier, but we didn't necessarily highlight it, don't be an expert in just one of these things, but really think about cross-training and the ability to perform multiple tasks, and particularly those individuals who are working for the lead agency and the leaders of the lead agency. For most family justice centers, it's really a whatever it takes in any given moment to get the job done.
So what are the biggest problems developing true collaboration? Did you see like the power and control is highlighted on there? Personality conflicts, ego struggles, politics, competition. There also is real limited resources, different value systems, priorities, goals. You can see the list goes on and on. But what I am going to tell you is even though there are biggest problems in sometimes developing the collaboration, even with those sometimes in our own backyard, we've still been able to overcome those things. And so I think you just have to be committed to seeing it through.
Yeah, and communication is the key.
Absolutely.
Constant communication.
So what are attributes of a healthy center? Grace, mercy, forgiveness, humility, unselfishness, sense of humor, yes. It's why Ken and I have a banter sometimes back and forth. Encouragement, mutual respect, shared resources, and massive amounts of communication.
Yeah, and so the sense of humor is really important, and so and fun. I would include fun and humor in there together. So some of the things we've done to keep our teams together over the years is we'll have Halloween costume contests,
which are hysterical.
Pumpkin decorating contests. Lots of different things at Christmas that are fun. We've had Nerf gun battles, which you got to think of things that are particularly attractive to your law enforcement partners.
Yes, yeah, they're not. They might not dress up for Halloween, but when we did a little obstacle course with Nerf guns, they were all there, and by goodness, they were going to win too.
Yeah, and the other thing that I have told Michelle over the years, because as the lead agency, the members of your team on the lead agency will get weary over the years. Yes. But I remind our team all the time that of all the partners of the Family Justice Center, we're the only ones whose mission it is to build and sustain this partnership. And so when we say grace, we are the ones that have to constantly model that grace. And we're the ones that have to really be focused on making sure that partnership thrives, not just survives.
So the next part that we want to segue into is somewhat of a virtual tour of centers across the United States. So I'm going to warn you, you need to buckle up for safety because I am going to sort of blow through some of this. But this is when we do this virtual tour of what you're going to see across the country. The idea is that we want you to dream big. Like this is the time right now to be thinking, oh, here are all the possibilities. And so we want to show you what people have done across the country.
Yeah, and as you're looking at these pictures, what I would want you to think about too is how do we put our stamp on this?
That's right.
In Delaware, and
make it bigger and better.
Yeah, think of what we talked about early in this discussion about communicating respect to survivors.
So here we go, our friends in North Carolina and Guilford County. This is what their lobby looks like. So a couple different, they've got a 12,000 square foot shared spaces, completely full. And I think we've heard that from many directors across the country when they say, what's one of your biggest regrets a year after moving? We're already full. So build for that 3-year, 5-year, 10-year plan of what does that look like. But the lobby is very welcoming, very homey. Here's the San Diego lobby. as well. There's a lot of different models that you'll see. When we were doing our tour of other centers, when we were in our design phase, one of the things that people talk to us about is their lobby right at the front door was some wasted space for them, that they wanted to get people behind a secure door. So we took that into account at One Safe Place. We don't have a lot of seating in our lobby. We have this more of like an arts gallery to spotlight some of that. Our idea is we wanted to get them in the door at the very back. That is a live green wall. Ken and I talk about it all the time. We've changed plants. Sometimes we have to change vendors because we got little gnats, but it is a gorgeous wall. And when people see that, they're like, is that real? And it really does identify respect, as that's the first thing that survivors see when they walk in. But then we immediately get them behind that secure door for safety.
So one of the things we believe in, and others do too, is this idea of an open floor plan, open workspace. And so we said, well, how do we make sure that once we get everybody in the same building, they don't fall back into the silos? Well, our answer to that is we don't put them in enclosed offices.
Yeah, people ask, where's your office? I'm like, you need my pod? Let me show you. I will escort you. I think the true meaning is we really looked at, and many centers are doing this, is what does true collaboration look like? And we looked to the private sector, private businesses that were really known for their, like Ken literally even made me join a book club. I was like, do I look like the book club type of girl? I'm not. I don't have patience for that, but I did. We read some of these books where these private businesses were really known for open collaboration. And what we found is every single one of their management teams were in open floor plan models. And so that's why now we're seeing that incorporated across the country. And then we've got our friends in Oklahoma City, Palomar, and their Family Justice Center. They moved into a 21,000 square foot temporary facility. I'm pretty sure they've recently gotten some money from the governor's office to build a state-of-the-art facility. So I can't wait to see what they do.
I think they've got more than $30 million in committed government resources.
But I mean, their temporary facility is amazing. And this is some of the pictures that you can see of what they've started in their first phase. And then even though when we opened our doors in Fort Worth in 2014, we were the largest family justice center in the world. Well, right behind us came Milwaukee. And what is remarkable about their center is they have a family justice center, their child advocacy center, and their shelter are all co-located on this. And then when I think they were about 2 years behind us, when they opened their doors, they became the world's largest family justice center. What's really unique about their center is that orange space on the corner is like the primo place in their family justice center. And you want to know what that space is? That's where the survivors, that's their dining hall. So they gave their survivors the most primo, architecturally like beautiful place in their facility, and their shelter services that are on site. I wish I had that on site at our center for sure.
And we got about 10 more minutes. We're going to buzz through a lot of this.
We are. So here's some more pictures from our friends from Milwaukee. Here is, Margaret and her team in Denver have done an amazing job with some of their facility designs. And then we're going to take you to Sweden because this movement has gone international for sure. And so here are some designs. You can also see Sweden has a live green wall in their space. To Denise McCain's Montgomery County and Maryland Family Justice Center, some of the rooms there that they have are very nice. Orange County Family Justice Center is a 25,000 square foot facility. It's next to a park and it's also across the street from a hospital. So really the design is centrally located to what else was around that facility.
And we haven't talked about a lot today, but think a lot about your location.
Location. And then our Buncombe County Family Justice Center, what some of their rooms look like, how they've incorporated their logo on the outside of the building, 10,000 square feet, shared spaces. They are full at capacity. Then we've got one of the parishes in Louisiana, and they're 15,000 square foot. It's a child advocacy center and family justice center co-located model. Then we also have another CAC and Family Justice Center co-located model in Indiana. And then how are you going to incorporate art into your Family Justice Center? We have a huge art gallery. We have an art project. Survivors love the look and the feel of the art that you incorporate in your Family Justice Center is critically important as much space as you have.
Yeah, and think about how to make it locally relevant and engaging to your specific population.
And here's some Voices art project that have been added in Family Justice Centers, and some other art pieces and social enterprise models that you can incorporate into a Family Justice Center model. And then you've got to have those access to computers and learning centers, and so we can see that across the country. We're also seeing, especially now, I mean, this was some benefits to Family Justice Centers with shelter-in-place orders and people having to figure out Zoom. We didn't even do Zoom before COVID happened. And so now, as a result, we're seeing a lot more Family Justice Centers, a lot more courts are a little bit more open with that video conferencing, where maybe our offenders are at the courthouse, but our victims are basically video conferencing in from the local Family Justice Center. And then you have to think about how you're going to recognize all of those donors. And so, look, you want to give me $1 million. Where would you like your name, please? I'll put it anywhere you would like. So a lot of donor recognition being built. Kitchens, dining rooms, place for gatherings. I literally call our dining room the forced collaboration zone. And the reason that I call it a forced collaboration zone is when you have a building that's 67,000 square foot, when you've got multiple floors, you have to create a common place where people gather. And so the dining room for us is the only place that has vending machines that you can get a Coke. It's also the only place in the building that has ice. And in Texas, that's a big deal that you have ice. And it's the only place where we have the windows that are there, so our staff can collaborate and just sort of get out of their areas.
And we just added a ping pong table to make it a little more fun.
We did, thanks Ken, because Ken can't say no.
We created we also made a rule that is mostly followed. We ask folks not to eat lunch at their desk, so so that A, the whole building doesn't smell like fish, and B, that we bring everybody together during lunch times.
So children's rooms are just, dreams are getting bigger and better. I mean, I think we've got some competition across the country. I think SeaWorld did San Diego's Family Justice. We just repainted our licensed child care center, and it's gorgeous. These were just plain walls. The child care center was great, but we wanted an experience for our kids, and for the parents and for the professionals that are in this. And now we have an experience for them that is living and breathing on the walls, and it's timeless. It's not something that we wanted to age. And so we're also seeing specialized detectives co-located with prosecutors and advocates at Family Justice Centers. Ken mentioned this earlier. Think about large conference rooms. One of the things that makes our center really attractive is we built a large training room that can hold 100 professionals, and we can do multiple trainings. Milwaukee did the same thing. Guilford County in North Carolina uses a shared training room with law enforcement, which is a very typical law enforcement design, but it's a shared training room style, and it works for them, and they're able to also host a lot of trainings. And then we're seeing our forensic exams across the country incorporated in Family Justice Centers. Ken and I are fixing to write a grant. I'm going to have an examination room. It's like one of the things that we built and we designed for, but it's not functioned. It's one of the last things on my plan. So hopefully 11 years in, we're fixing to accomplish that in Fort Worth. Living rooms, interview rooms, nice living rooms, soft lights, all the things that you can imagine for trauma. So this is one of Gail Strack's experiments that she did in San Diego. And I can relate to this because her before picture is exactly what a room used to look like when I was at the police department, and our officers would bring not only our victims, but would also bring suspects into that room. This was what her first interview room looked like at the San Diego Family Justice Center, because her law enforcement partner said this is what they wanted to look like. So she got them to agree to do a second room, which was the after room, and then they basically did a trial and error with survivors at the time to see which room would they have better interviews in? And as you can imagine, Gail Strack won. Not only did the survivors prefer the after room, but so did the law enforcement officers as well. And so now this is what we have, an evolution of soft interview rooms, and this is now what is being incorporated across the country. And then we have, even just keep thinking outside the box, coffee stands, espresso bars. People need their caffeine. We built a courtroom in the middle of our center, and that is Ken with Gail and Casey. I don't know what y'all are doing there.
I'm cross-examining Casey.
Having a funny moment.
Yeah.
Yes. So we built a courtroom because survivors across the country tell us that court's the scariest place that they go. So we thought, why not build this into our Family Justice Center? And so we use this as a mock courtroom, and that was the purpose. We thought we could do some video conferencing. We've not been able to accomplish that in our community, but other sites have done a wonderful job. But what we didn't expect to happen in building a courtroom is all the training and the lead of an evolution of the utilization of expert witnesses in criminal cases that really wasn't happening before the existence of the Family Justice Center. And now we're able to use that courtroom for mock purposes and for training all of those experts. So it's been a phenomenal asset to have. County library sites are now located at the Family Justice Center, which is really outside the box sort of things. Showers, other amenities. I can't tell you how many times we have survivors that come in and need to use our shower services. So I didn't think in the beginning that we would need that. I'm glad we built it because now we do use that. Laundry services, same. We've got 2 places on site now at our facility that we can do laundry services. Outdoor patios that you can see in New Orleans. Great spaces for not only your survivors, but for your professional staff to be able to get some reprieve. Hair salons. We now have a functioning salon on site at our center as well, which is amazing. And I don't know, this is what happens when you do a tour with Gail Strack. She takes a picture and then puts it in a PowerPoint. So it was a really big deal for us when we added an ice cream machine. I don't know, I'm lactose intolerant, not a thing for me, but like people were literally harassing me. When's the ice cream machine coming? When's the ice cream machine coming? It was a really big deal when we added the ice cream machine. And this is in the place I call our forced collaboration zone. Yeah. And then we're seeing Dress for Success partnerships, professional clothing, that long-term empowerment and independence. And this movement just keeps growing and growing.
So I think this is maybe a good place for us to kind of pause.
Yeah.
Yeah. We've given you a mountain of information, and there's just so much out there. But we want to just kind of give you a taste of the world of family justice centers, give you a sense of what family justice centers across the country look like, what the result of different people dreaming big has looked like. And so we don't do it because we think you need to do it just like anybody else did. We think you need to find your path, and we can't wait to see what happens when Delaware dreams big. Again, thanks so much for having us in your community. We are super excited about the next couple of days and meeting more of you here in Delaware, and are just, like I said, excited about starting this journey with you.
So glad to be here. Can I also say that our Focus Media services that are preparing all of this, you are amazing. You have kept us on point. And so you should be here in this studio. Like I walked in, I was like, I feel like we're like at a press conference at a White House. Like this is like official and legit. So thank you all, Focus Media, for what y'all have done in putting this production on for us.
And now Laura's going to come back with a few final words.
Yeah.
All right, good morning again, everyone. They sent me out here alone. Hopefully that doesn't mean I'm the lone nut. So I just want to thank Ken and Michelle for giving us a whirlwind but thorough overview of the Family Justice Center model. I'm just going to recap kind of what our next step is here this morning and today. So that concludes our community forum. We're going to take about a 15-minute break. And then at 11:45, the community conversation with Cohort 1 will begin. Cohort 2 will be from 1:30 to 2:30. and cohort 3 will be from 2:45 to 3:45. You should have received an email. It may be labeled DVCC or Eventbrite, listing the link to join your cohort. If you have not received that and you've checked your spam and your junk, please reach out to Mo Monagle. Maureen's email address will be on the last slide after I conclude here. You can email her and she can forward you the link. And again, participation in these sessions is incredibly important. It's Michelle and Ken's opportunity to hear from you on what you and the survivors we serve think is needed here in Delaware. So thank you again for joining us, and we are looking forward to seeing you in the individual forums.